The shotgun blast that killed Clara Hartley's husband echoed through her dreams for 3 years after they buried him in the hard Texas soil, and she wondered if she would ever sleep peacefully again. She had been 22 when Thomas died, shot down by rustlers who thought they could take what little livestock the Hartleys had managed to raise on their homestead outside Presidio, Texas. The year was 1882, and the land along the Rio Grande was still wild enough that lawlessness flourished in the spaces between settlements. Thomas had gone out that night in February to check on the cattle after hearing noises. He never came back alive. Clara found him at dawn, sprawled in the dirt with his blood soaking into the earth he had worked so hard to tame. The funeral had been small. A handful of neighbors, the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through, and Clara standing there in her only black dress, her face dry because she had already cried every tear her body could produce in the hours between finding Thomas and laying him to rest. She was a widow before she had truly learned how to be a wife. They had been married only 14 months. Now, in the summer of 1885, Clara was 25 and her homestead was falling apart. The roof leaked in 3 places. The fences sagged where posts had rotted through. Half her chickens had been carried off by coyotes because she did not have the strength to repair the coop properly. She managed to keep a small garden alive through sheer stubbornness, and she sold eggs and vegetables in Presidio when she had enough to make the trip worthwhile. It was barely enough to survive on. She woke each morning before dawn, not because she was eager to face the day, but because sleeping meant dreaming, and dreaming meant seeing Thomas fall again and again. Better to be awake, to keep her hands busy, to fill her mind with the 1,000 small tasks that made up a day of survival in West Texas. She spoke to almost no one. She went to town only when necessary. She had built walls around her heart so thick and high that she sometimes felt like she was living at the bottom of a well, looking up at a distant circle of sky. On a Tuesday morning in late August, Clara was in her garden pulling weeds when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. She straightened slowly, her hand instinctively moving to the revolver she now wore whenever she was outside. The gun had been Thomas's. She had taught herself to shoot it in the months after his death, standing in the yard and firing at tin cans until her arm ached and her ears rang. She was not a particularly good shot, but she could hit a target at close range, and that was enough. The rider who came into view was tall and lean, sitting his horse with the easy grace of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. He wore a dusty brown hat, a faded blue shirt, and leather chaps that had seen better days. A rope hung coiled on his saddle, and she could see the glint of spurs on his boots. He raised one hand in a peaceful gesture as he approached. "Morning, madam," he called out when he was close enough that he did not have to shout. "I don't mean to disturb you." Clara kept her hand near her gun. "Then maybe you should ride on." He brought his horse to a stop about 20 feet from where she stood. Up close, she could see that he was perhaps a few years older than she was, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes were a striking pale blue, the color of the sky just before full daylight. There was a gentleness in those eyes that seemed at odds with the hard landscape around them. "Name's Vincent Rollins," he said. "I've been working cattle up north, and I'm heading down toward the border looking for work. Thought I might stop and ask if you needed any help around your place. I noticed your fences are in rough shape as I was riding past." "I did not ask for your opinion about my fences," Clara said sharply. "No, madam, you did not," Vincent agreed. He did not seem offended by her tone. "But I've got time and I'm handy with repairs. I would not ask much in return. A meal or two, maybe a place to sleep in your barn for a few nights while I do the work. Then I will move on." Clara studied him with suspicious eyes. She had learned not to trust easily, especially not men who showed up alone with convenient offers of help. "I cannot pay you." "I did not ask for pay," Vincent said patiently. "Just food and shelter while I work. I know what it is to struggle to keep a place going, madam. I can see you have been doing it alone for a while. There is no shame in accepting help." There was something in the quiet certainty of his voice that made Clara hesitate. She looked at the sagging fence line, at the barn door that hung crooked on its hinges, at the countless other repairs she had been putting off because she simply did not have the strength or skill to handle them. Pride had kept her isolated for 3 years, but pride would not fix a roof or mend a fence. 3 days, she said finally. "You can stay 3 days. You will sleep in the barn and I will bring you meals. You will not come into the house. When the 3 days are done, you will leave." "Is that clear?" "Yes, madam," Vincent said. "That is clear." He dismounted and began unsaddling his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding that looked as trail-worn as its rider. Clara watched him for another moment, then turned back to her garden, her heart beating harder than she wanted to admit. She had not had anyone stay on her property since Thomas died. The thought of having a stranger here, even one who seemed respectful and calm, made her feel like her skin was too tight. That first day, Vincent worked on the fences while Clara tried to focus on her own tasks. She could see him from wherever she was, measuring and cutting new posts, digging holes, stringing wire with practiced efficiency. He did not speak to her except to ask where she kept certain tools or materials. He did not try to make conversation. He simply worked, steady and methodical, pausing occasionally to wipe the sweat from his face or take a drink from the canteen he carried. At noon, Clara brought him a plate of cornbread and beans. She set it on a stump near where he was working and stepped back quickly. "Thank you, madam," Vincent said, setting down his hammer. "My name is Clara," she said before she could stop herself. "Clara Hartley. You do not need to keep calling me madam." "Clara," he repeated, and the way he said it, soft and respectful, made something twist in her chest. "Thank you for the food, Clara." She nodded and retreated to the house, unsettled by how much she had noticed the way her name sounded in his voice. That evening, she brought him supper and found that he had repaired nearly half the fence line. The new post stood straight and strong, the wire pulled tight. It was more progress than she could have made in a month working alone. "You are fast," she said, surprising herself by speaking first. Vincent looked up from where he was washing his hands in the trough. "I have had a lot of practice. My family had a ranch up in the Panhandle when I was growing up. I learned to do this kind of work before I was tall enough to see over the fence posts." "You said had," Clara observed. "Do they not have it anymore?" Something shifted in Vincent's expression, a brief shadow of pain. "They are all gone now. My parents, my younger brother, fever took them 6 years back. I sold the ranch because I could not run it alone and I could not stand to be there without them. I have been drifting ever since, working where I can find it." Clara felt an unexpected pang of recognition. "I am sorry for your loss." "And I am sorry for yours," Vincent said quietly. "I saw the grave marker when I rode up. Your husband," she nodded, not trusting her voice. "How long?" he asked. 3 years this past February." Vincent was silent for a moment, then said, "Grief is a heavy burden to carry alone." Clara felt her walls trying to go up again, that instinctive need to push away anything that felt too close, too intimate. But there was no pity in Vincent's eyes, only understanding. He knew what loss felt like. He knew what it was to have the people you loved taken away too soon. "I should let you eat," she said, stepping back. "I will bring you breakfast in the morning." "I appreciate it," Vincent said. "Good night, Clara." "Good night," she whispered, and walked back to the house with her arms wrapped around herself despite the heat. The second day, Vincent finished the fences and moved on to the barn door. Clara found herself watching him more than she had the day before, noticing things she had tried not to see. The way his shoulders moved as he worked, the patience with which he approached each task, taking the time to do it right rather than rushing through. The gentleness with which he handled his horse, speaking to the animal in a low voice and making sure it had water and shade. In the afternoon, when the heat was at its worst, Vincent took a break under the cottonwood tree near the house. Clara was inside, but she could see him through the window. He had taken off his hat and was leaning back against the trunk, his eyes closed. There was weariness in the lines of his face, but also a kind of quiet strength. He looked like a man who had been tested by life and had not broken. She made a pitcher of cool water from the well, and before she could talk herself out of it, brought it outside along with a cup. "You look like you could use this," she said, setting it down beside him. Vincent opened his eyes and smiled, and Clara realized it was the first time she had seen him really smile. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. "You are kind to think of it. This heat is fierce." "You get used to it," Clara said, then added, "or maybe you just forget what it is like to be cool." He laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that made her lips quirk in an almost smile. "I suppose that is true. I have been in Texas long enough that I cannot remember the last time I was truly cold." Clara found herself sitting down in the shade a few feet away from him, which surprised her. She had not intended to linger. "Where are you from originally?" "Born and raised in Texas," Vincent said. "My parents came out here from Missouri before I was born. They wanted land of their own, a place to build something. My father used to say that Texas was big enough for a man's dreams." "Was he right?" Clara asked. Vincent considered the question. "I think he believed he was right, and maybe that is what mattered. They worked hard and they were happy, at least as far as I could tell. They built something that mattered to them. That it did not last forever does not mean it was not worth doing." Clara thought about her own homestead, about the dreams she and Thomas had shared. They had wanted children, a real house instead of the rough cabin they had started with, cattle and horses and a life built together. All of that had died with Thomas. She had kept the homestead going out of sheer stubbornness, but she had not been building anything. She had just been surviving. "What happened to him?" Vincent asked carefully. "Your husband, if you do not mind my asking." Clara was quiet for a long moment. She had not talked about Thomas's death to anyone in years, but something about Vincent's presence, about the way he listened without judgment, made the words come easier than she expected. "Rustlers," she said. "They came in the night and Thomas went out to stop them. They shot him and took our cattle anyway, all 12 head. By the time I found him, he had been gone for hours. I sat with him until sunrise because I could not bear to leave him alone in the dark." Vincent's expression was pained. "That must have been unbearable." "It was," Clara said simply. "And then I had to keep living anyway. I had to bury him and figure out how to survive without him and pretend that I was not dying inside every single day. After a while, I stopped pretending. I just stopped feeling much of anything at all." "But you kept the homestead," Vincent observed. "I did not know what else to do," Clara admitted. "This place was our dream. Letting it go felt like losing him all over again. So I stayed, even though some days I am not sure why." Vincent was quiet, letting her words settle between them. Then he said, "I think I understand that. After my family died, I kept working the ranch for almost a year. I told myself I was honoring them, but really I was just too afraid to face the fact that everything I knew was gone. It took me a long time to realize that holding on to something out of fear is not the same as holding on to it out of love." Clara looked at him sharply. "Are you saying I should leave?" "No," Vincent said gently. I am saying that whatever you choose, it should be because it is what you want, not because you are afraid of what comes next. Grief can trap us just as surely as walls and locks. She wanted to be angry at him for presuming to understand her situation, but she could not find the anger. He was not judging her. He was simply offering the perspective of someone who had walked a similar path. I do not know what I want anymore, she said quietly. I used to know exactly what I wanted. Now I just get through one day at a time. That is a start, Vincent said. Sometimes that is all we can do. They sat in silence after that, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Clara felt something shifting inside her, like a door that had been rusted shut for years, finally starting to move. It frightened her, but it also felt like the first real breath she had taken in a long time. On the third day, Vincent repaired the barn door and then asked if he could look at the roof. You said 3 days, Clara reminded him. Today is the third day. I know what I said, Vincent replied. But I can see from down here that your roof has problems, and we are heading into the season when the rains come. If you would like, I could stay a few more days and patch it properly. Same terms as before. Clara knew she should say no. She should thank him for his work and let him ride away as they had agreed. But the thought of him leaving made her chest feel tight in a way that had nothing to do with anxiety and everything to do with loneliness. She had grown accustomed to seeing him working in the yard, to the sound of his voice when they spoke, to the knowledge that she was not completely alone. 4 more days, she heard herself say. And then you have to leave. Vincent nodded, and if he was pleased by her answer, he did not show it. 4 more days. I will make sure your roof is sound before I go. He spent that afternoon assessing the damage, climbing up carefully and testing each weak spot. Clara stood in the yard and watched, her heart in her throat every time he moved near a particularly rotten section. She told herself it was because she did not want to be responsible if he got hurt, but that was not entirely true. The real truth was that she was starting to care what happened to him, and that terrified her. That evening, after she brought him his supper, Vincent lingered near the house instead of retreating to the barn immediately. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Clara tensed. "What is it? Do you ever think about leaving here, starting over somewhere else?" "Every day," Clara said before she could censor herself. "But I would not know where to go or what to do. This homestead is all I have." "You have more than that," Vincent said seriously. "You have courage. You have strength. You have survived 3 years on your own in a place that breaks men twice your size. That counts for something, Clara." She felt heat rising in her face, and it was not from the sun. "You do not know me well enough to say things like that." "Maybe not," Vincent conceded. "But I know what I have seen. I have met a lot of people in my wandering, and most of them would not have lasted a month doing what you have done. You are stronger than you think." Clara did not know what to say to that. Part of her wanted to argue, to deflect the compliment, but another part of her, a part she had thought was dead, warmed at his words. It had been so long since anyone had seen her as anything other than the tragic young widow, the woman to be pitied and avoided. "Thank you," she said finally, the words coming out rough. "That is kind of you to say." "It is not kindness," Vincent said. "It is the truth." He tipped his hat to her and headed for the barn, leaving Clara standing in the fading light with her heart beating too fast and her defenses feeling dangerously fragile. Over the next 4 days, Vincent worked on the roof while Clara tried to sort through the complicated tangle of feelings that seemed to grow stronger each time she saw him. She found herself taking more care with her appearance in the mornings, pinning her hair back neatly and changing into a dress that was less worn than her usual work clothes. She lingered longer when she brought him meals, asking questions about his travels and listening to his stories about the places he had been and the people he had met. Vincent had a gift for storytelling, painting pictures with his words of cattle drives through the spring prairies, of nights spent under stars so thick they looked like silver dust, of small towns and big cities and everything in between. He made her laugh, which was something she had not done in years. He made her curious about the world beyond her small homestead. And slowly, carefully, she began to tell him things about herself. About her childhood in a small farming community in East Texas. About meeting Thomas at a church social when she was 19. About their decision to homestead in Presidio because they wanted land that was truly theirs. She told him about the dreams they had shared and the future they had been building together. "He sounds like a good man," Vincent said when she finished. "He was," Clara agreed. "I loved him very much." "I can tell," Vincent said gently, "and I think he would be proud of how you have carried on." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, which startled her. She had not cried over Thomas in more than a year. "I do not know about that. I have been more surviving than living." "Surviving takes its own kind of courage," Vincent said, "but maybe it is time to think about living again, too." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw the quiet hope in his eyes. He was not pushing her, not demanding anything, but he was letting her know that he saw her, that he cared about what happened to her. The realization made her feel vulnerable in a way that was both frightening and exhilarating. "I do not know if I remember how," she whispered. "Then maybe you could learn again," Vincent said softly. "One small step at a time." That night, Clara lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the homestead settling around her. For the first time in years, she let herself imagine a different future. One where she was not alone. One where there was laughter and conversation and maybe even love. It seemed impossibly distant, like something that happened to other people but not to her. But Vincent had planted the seed of possibility, and now she could not stop thinking about it. The next morning she woke before dawn as usual, but instead of dreading the day ahead, she felt a flutter of anticipation. She dressed carefully, braided her hair, and went outside to start her chores. Vincent was already up, working on the roof in the relative cool of the early morning. When he saw her, he climbed down and walked over. "Morning," he said, and there was warmth in his voice that made her stomach flip. "Morning," Clara replied, suddenly shy. "I am making breakfast. Would you like to eat with me at the table instead of outside?" It was a small thing, an invitation into her house, but it felt enormous. She was opening a door she had kept closed for 3 years, and they both knew it. Vincent's expression softened. "I would like that very much." They ate together at the rough wooden table Thomas had built, and Clara found that it did not hurt the way she thought it would. Having Vincent there felt natural, right even. They talked about inconsequential things, about the weather and the repairs still needed around the homestead, and whether the garden would produce enough vegetables to see her through the winter. But underneath the ordinary conversation, there was an awareness, a growing connection that neither of them acknowledged out loud but both of them felt. After breakfast, Vincent said, "I should have the roof finished by tomorrow. Then I will be out of your hair." Clara's heart sank. She had been trying not to think about him leaving, but now it was imminent and unavoidable. "Where will you go?" "South, probably," Vincent said. "There is usually work to be found on the ranches near the border. I will find something." "And then?" Clara asked. "You will just keep drifting from place to place." Vincent looked at her for a long moment. "I have been drifting because I did not have a reason to stay anywhere, but if I had a reason, I think I would be ready to stop." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She knew what he was saying without him having to say it directly. He was offering her a choice, a chance to ask him to stay, but fear rose up in her chest, cold and familiar. What if she let him in and something happened to him? What if she opened her heart again and it got broken even worse than before? She had barely survived losing Thomas. She did not think she could survive losing someone else. "I should get to work," she said, standing up abruptly. "Thank you for breakfast." She fled the house before he could respond, her hands shaking and her heart pounding. She spent the rest of the day avoiding him, staying inside and busying herself with tasks that did not need doing. By the time evening came, she felt sick with regret and confusion. Vincent did not come to the house for supper. Instead, Clara found him sitting outside the barn looking at the sunset. She approached slowly, a plate of food in her hands. "I brought you this," she said quietly. "Thank you," Vincent said, but he did not look at her. Clara stood there awkwardly, wanting to say something but not knowing how to begin. Finally, she said, "I am sorry about earlier. I should not have run off like that." "You do not owe me an apology," Vincent said, finally meeting her eyes. "I should not have presumed. I know I am just a drifter who happened to stop at your homestead. I had no right to suggest anything more." "It is not that," Clara said desperately. "It is not that I do not want." She stopped, struggling to find the words. "I am afraid, Vincent. I am afraid of caring about someone again. I am afraid of what it will do to me if I lose them." Vincent stood up and walked over to her, stopping a respectful distance away. "I cannot promise you that nothing bad will ever happen," he said gently. "Life does not work that way. But I can promise you that if you give me a chance, I will do everything in my power to be worthy of your trust. I will work hard and I will be honest with you, and I will never make you regret letting me into your life." Clara felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "What if I cannot do it? What if I am too broken?" "You are not broken," Vincent said firmly. "You are hurt, and that is not the same thing. Hurt can heal, Clara, but only if you let it." She looked at him through her tears, at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known she was praying. He was patient and kind and strong, and he saw her as more than just her grief. He saw the woman she could be if she was brave enough to try. "I do not want you to leave," she whispered. "Then ask me to stay," Vincent said softly. Clara took a shaky breath, feeling like she was standing at the edge of a cliff. But this time, instead of stepping back, she stepped forward. "Will you stay, Vincent? Will you stay here with me?" "Yes," Vincent said, and the joy in his voice was unmistakable. "Yes, Clara, I will stay." He closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms, and Clara let herself be held for the first time in 3 years. She cried against his chest, great heaving sobs that she had been holding back for so long. Vincent just held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft reassurances. He did not try to stop her tears or tell her everything was fine. He just let her feel what she needed to feel, and that was exactly what she needed. When the tears finally subsided, Clara pulled back and looked up at him. "I must look a mess." "You look beautiful," Vincent said, and she could tell he meant it. She laughed, a watery sound, and he smiled. Then, slowly, carefully, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, a question more than a demand, and Clara felt something inside her that had been frozen for years finally begin to thaw. She kissed him back, tentatively at first and then with growing confidence, and when they finally parted they were both breathless. "I have wanted to do that for days," Vincent admitted. "I think I have wanted you to," Clara said shyly. They stood there in the gathering darkness, holding each other, and Clara felt hope stirring in her heart. It was fragile and new, but it was real, and it was hers. The next weeks passed in a kind of dream. Vincent stayed, not as a hired hand or a temporary guest, but as something more, something that grew deeper with each passing day. He finished the repairs on the homestead and then started on new projects, building a proper chicken coop and reinforcing the barn and clearing land for a bigger garden. Clara worked alongside him when she could, marveling at how much easier everything was with two people working together. They talked for hours in the evenings, sitting on the porch and watching the stars come out. Vincent told her more about his family, about his childhood on the ranch, and the dreams he had once had. Clara told him about the person she had been before Thomas died, the girl who had loved to sing and dance and who had believed the world was full of good things waiting to happen. "You could be that person again," Vincent said one night. "Not the same, maybe, but something like her. You do not have to let grief define you forever." "I think I am starting to see that," Clara said. "Being with you, it reminds me that there is more to life than just getting through it." "You make me want to live again, Vincent. Really live." "You do the same for me," Vincent said seriously. "I have been drifting for 6 years, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. I told myself I liked the freedom, but really, I was just avoiding the risk of caring about anything again. You have made me want to take that risk." They were careful with each other, learning each other's boundaries and needs. Vincent never pushed Clara to move faster than she was ready for. He was content to let their relationship unfold at its own pace, understanding that trust had to be rebuilt slowly. Clara, for her part, found herself opening up in ways she had not thought possible. She let Vincent into her house, into her daily life, and slowly, carefully, into her heart. One evening in early October, as the heat of summer finally began to ease, Vincent said, "I need to go into Presidio tomorrow. We are running low on supplies, and I want to pick up some tools for the work I am planning. Would you come with me?" Clara hesitated. She had not been to town in months, preferring to avoid the curious looks and pitying whispers that always seemed to follow her. But something about the way Vincent asked, like he wanted her company rather than just needing an extra pair of hands, made her nod. "All right," she said. "I will come with you." They set out early the next morning in the wagon Vincent had repaired, the buckskin gelding pulling them along the rutted road toward town. It was a beautiful day, the sky a brilliant blue and the air finally cool enough to be comfortable. Clara found herself relaxing, enjoying the novelty of going somewhere with someone, of not being alone. Presidio was a small town clustered along the Rio Grande, a mix of adobe buildings and wooden storefronts that served the ranchers and homesteaders scattered across the surrounding territory. It was busy that day, people going about their business, cowboys lounging outside the saloon, women shopping at the general store. Clara felt self-conscious as they drove down the main street, aware of people looking at them, at her and Vincent together. They stopped at the general store first, tying up the horse and going inside. The proprietor, a heavy-set man named Mr. Jameson, looked up in surprise when he saw Clara. "Mrs. Hartley," he said, his tone a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "We have not seen you in quite a while." "I have been busy at the homestead," Clara said, lifting her chin slightly. Mr. Jameson's gaze shifted to Vincent, his eyebrows rising. "And who might this be?" "Vincent Rollins," Vincent said, extending his hand. "I have been helping Mrs. Hartley with repairs on her place." Mr. Jameson shook his hand, but Clara could see the speculation in his eyes. By tomorrow, everyone in Presidio would be talking about the widow Hartley and the cowboy who was staying at her homestead. The thought would have mortified her a few months ago, but now she found she did not care as much. Let them talk. She knew the truth of her relationship with Vincent, and that was what mattered. They made their purchases quickly, and Clara was relieved when they could leave the store and its curious proprietor behind. As they loaded supplies into the wagon, a woman's voice called out behind them, "Clara, Clara Hartley." Clara turned to see Martha Henderson, one of the neighbor women who had attended Thomas's funeral. She was in her 40s, a kind woman with a weathered face and a warm smile. "Hello, Martha," Clara said, trying to sound pleasant. Martha walked over, her eyes bright with curiosity but not unkind. "It is good to see you, dear. You look well. Better than the last time I saw you." "Thank you," Clara said. "I have been doing better lately." Martha's gaze slid to Vincent, and Clara felt compelled to make introductions. "This is Vincent Rollins. He has been helping me with the homestead." "Vincent, this is Martha Henderson. She and her husband have a ranch north of town." "Pleased to meet you, madam," Vincent said politely. "And you," Martha said, her smile growing. She looked back at Clara with knowing eyes. "I am glad you have help, Clara. That place is too much for one person to manage alone, and it is good to see you out and about. You have been a stranger for too long." There was genuine warmth in her voice, and Clara felt her defenses softening. "I know I have kept to myself. It has been hard to face people." "We understand, dear," Martha said gently. "Grief is a private thing, and everyone handles it in their own way. But you should know that you have friends here if you need them. You do not have to carry your burdens alone." Clara felt unexpected tears pricking her eyes. "Thank you, Martha. That means more than you know." Martha patted her arm, then nodded to Vincent. "You take good care of her, young man." "I intend to, madam," Vincent said seriously. As they drove out of town, Clara found herself thinking about Martha's words. She had isolated herself so completely that she had forgotten there were people who cared about her, who would support her if she let them. It was another kind of wall she had built, and now she was beginning to see that maybe it was time to take that one down too. "That was not as bad as I thought it would be," she said to Vincent as they headed back toward the homestead. "People care about you," Vincent said. "I could see it in the way they looked at you. You matter to them, Clara." "I did not feel like I mattered to anyone after Thomas died," Clara admitted. "I felt like I had disappeared, like I was a ghost haunting my own life." "You matter to me," Vincent said quietly, "more than I have the words to explain." Clara reached over and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You matter to me too. I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone again, but I do. You have become so important to me, Vincent." He squeezed her hand, and they rode the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, connected by touch and understanding. As autumn deepened, their relationship continued to grow. Vincent proposed expanding the homestead, maybe getting some cattle and building up a herd again. Clara was hesitant at first, the memory of Thomas dying over cattle still raw, but Vincent was patient and persistent. "We will be careful," he promised. "We will take precautions. But Clara, we cannot live our lives in fear of what might happen. If we do, we are just existing, not really living." She knew he was right. And slowly, she began to let herself believe that maybe they could build something here together. Maybe the homestead did not have to be a monument to loss. Maybe it could be the foundation of a new life. They started small, buying a few head of cattle from a neighbor and building a secure corral for them. Vincent was vigilant about checking on the animals, and he taught Clara how to handle a rifle properly so she could defend the livestock if needed. It was strange at first, learning to care about cattle again, but Clara found that with Vincent by her side, it was not as frightening as she had expected. One evening in late November, they were sitting on the porch watching the sun go down when Vincent said, "Clara, I need to ask you something important." She looked at him, her heart suddenly racing. "What is it?" Vincent took her hand, his expression serious. "These past few months with you have been the happiest of my life. You have given me something I did not think I would ever have again. A home, a purpose, a reason to build a future instead of just drifting from one place to the next. And I have fallen in love with you, Clara. Completely and deeply in love with you." Clara felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness. I love you too, Vincent. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. Then marry me, Vincent said, his voice rough with emotion. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life showing you that love does not have to end in loss. Let me be your partner and your friend and your husband. Let me help you rebuild this homestead and make it into something we can both be proud of. Marry me, Clara. For a long moment, Clara could not speak. Her mind was flooded with memories of Thomas, of the life they had started to build together, of the future that had been stolen from them. But alongside those memories were new ones, images of Vincent working in the sun, laughing at her stories, holding her when she cried, kissing her in the moonlight. She had loved Thomas and she always would. But he was gone and she was still here. And Vincent was offering her a chance at something beautiful, something she had thought she would never have again. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Vincent, I will marry you. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Clara felt like her heart was going to burst from the overwhelming flood of love and joy and relief. She was not betraying Thomas by loving Vincent. She was honoring the life she still had, the future she could still build. Thomas would have wanted her to be happy. She finally understood that they were married in December in a simple ceremony at the small church in Presidio. Martha Henderson was there, along with a handful of other neighbors who had been kind to Clara over the years. The circuit preacher who had officiated Thomas's funeral was the same one who married them, and Clara appreciated the symmetry of it, the sense that she was closing one chapter and opening another. She wore a simple blue dress that had belonged to her mother, and Vincent wore his best shirt and a new string tie. When the preacher asked if she took Vincent to be her lawfully wedded husband, Clara's voice was strong and clear as she said, "I do." Vincent's vows were just as firm, and when they were pronounced husband and wife, he kissed her with such tenderness that Clara felt like she was floating. They were building something new together, something that belonged to them both. The first year of their marriage was not easy. There were hard days when the work seemed endless and the homestead demanded everything they had to give. There were moments when Clara's grief resurfaced unexpectedly, triggered by a memory or a particular slant of light, and Vincent had to hold her while she cried. There were times when Vincent's own losses weighed on him, and Clara had to remind him that he was not alone anymore, that they were facing the world together. But there were also days of laughter and joy, of small triumphs and growing confidence. The cattle herd expanded, and they were able to sell some steers for a decent profit. The garden produced more vegetables than they could eat, and Clara started selling the surplus in town again, this time with Vincent by her side. They repaired every inch of the homestead, replacing old structures with new ones, building something solid and lasting. In the spring of 1887, Clara realized she was pregnant. She told Vincent one evening after supper, her hands trembling as she placed them on her belly. "I am going to have a baby," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent's face went through a series of emotions, shock, joy, wonder, and something that looked like fear. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be," Clara said. "I have missed my monthly courses for 2 months now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. Vincent, we are going to have a child." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "This is the best news I have ever heard, but Clara, are you all right? Are you happy about this?" "I am terrified," Clara admitted. "But yes, I am happy. I am so happy I do not know what to do with all of it." They cried together, tears of joy and hope and anticipation. Clara thought about the children she had wanted to have with Thomas, the family they had dreamed of building. This was not the same as that dream, but it was still beautiful. It was still a miracle. The pregnancy was not easy. Clara was sick for the first few months, and there were days when she could barely keep food down. Vincent was endlessly patient, bringing her water and crackers, rubbing her back, sitting with her when she felt too miserable to do anything but lie in bed. As her belly grew, so did their excitement and their anxiety. They prepared a small room in the house for the baby, building a cradle out of wood Vincent cut and shaped himself. Martha Henderson came to visit regularly, bringing advice and baby clothes and the kind of practical wisdom that only came from having raised 6 children of her own. She assured Clara that the sickness would pass, that the fear was normal, that she was strong enough to do this. "You have survived so much already," Martha told her. "You can survive this too, and you will have Vincent by your side. That makes all the difference." Clara went into labor on a hot day in October, just as the leaves were starting to turn. The pain was worse than anything she had experienced, and there were moments when she thought she could not go on. But Vincent held her hand and spoke to her in a calm, steady voice, and Martha coached her through each contraction. After hours of labor, their son was born, a healthy baby with strong lungs and dark hair like his father's. Vincent wept when he held his son for the first time, cradling the tiny baby against his chest with infinite care. "He is perfect," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Clara, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas, after Clara's first husband, and James, after Vincent's younger brother. It felt right to honor the people they had lost, to carry their memories forward into this new life they were building. Clara healed slowly from the birth, but she had never been happier. Watching Vincent with their son, seeing the gentle way he handled the baby, the songs he sang and the stories he told, filled her heart to overflowing. This was what she had always wanted: a family, a home, a life filled with love. Over the next years, they continued to build their homestead into something truly impressive. The cattle herd grew to nearly 50 head, and they expanded into horses as well, breeding sturdy working animals that were in high demand among the local ranchers. Vincent proved to have a gift with horses, and Clara discovered she had a talent for managing the finances, keeping careful records and making smart decisions about when to buy and sell. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Emily Rose, born in 1889, and another son, Samuel Vincent, born in 1891. The homestead rang with the sounds of children playing, and Clara marveled at how different her life was from what it had been just a few years earlier. She had thought she would spend the rest of her days alone, trapped in grief and isolation. Instead, she had a husband who loved her, children who filled her days with joy and chaos, and a home that was thriving. There were still hard moments, of course. One winter, they lost a dozen cattle to a particularly brutal cold snap. Another year, the garden failed because of drought, and they had to buy vegetables at inflated prices just to feed the family. Vincent broke his arm in a fall from a horse and could not work for 6 weeks, forcing Clara to handle more than she thought she could manage. But they faced these challenges together, and that made all the difference. Martha Henderson became Clara's closest friend, a surrogate mother and confidante. She taught Clara about raising children and managing a household, about the rhythms of life on the Texas frontier. When Martha's husband died in 1890, Clara and Vincent were there to support her, just as she had supported them. It reminded Clara that family was not just about blood. It was about the people who showed up when you needed them, who stood by you through the hard times. By 1895, Thomas was 8 years old, Emily was 6, and Samuel was 4. The homestead had grown into a successful ranch with a real house that Vincent had built to replace the original cabin, a large barn, extensive corrals, and cultivated fields. Clara and Vincent employed 2 ranch hands to help with the work, and they had become respected members of the Presidio community. One evening in late summer, after the children were asleep, Clara and Vincent sat on the porch of their house, watching the stars come out. It was a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage, this quiet time together at the end of the day. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Clara asked, leaning against Vincent's shoulder. "What do you mean?" Vincent said, his arm coming around her. "If you had not stopped here that day," Clara said, "if I had turned you away, we would have missed all of this." Vincent was quiet for a moment, then said, "I think about it sometimes. How close I came to just riding past your homestead without stopping. Something made me turn off the road that day, and I will be grateful for it for the rest of my life." "I was so afraid," Clara admitted. "When you first asked to stay, when you started to matter to me, I was terrified. I thought if I let myself love you, I would lose you too, and I did not think I could survive that again." "But you took the risk anyway," Vincent said. "That took tremendous courage, Clara." "I think you made it easier," Clara said. "You were so patient with me. You never pushed me to be ready before I was. You just waited and let me find my way to you." "I would have waited as long as it took," Vincent said seriously. "You were worth waiting for. You are worth everything." Clara turned to kiss him, a long, sweet kiss that still made her heart race after nearly 10 years together. When they pulled apart, she said, "I love you so much, Vincent. Thank you for not giving up on me." "I love you too," Vincent said, "and I never could have given up on you. From the moment I saw you standing in that garden with your hand on your gun and fire in your eyes, I knew you were going to change my life." They sat together in the darkness, holding each other, listening to the sounds of their ranch settling down for the night. Inside the house, their children slept safely in their beds. Around them, the land they had built together stretched out toward the horizon. Clara thought about the girl she had been when she first came to Texas with Thomas, full of dreams and hope. She thought about the broken woman she had become after his death, trapped in grief and unable to imagine a future. And then she thought about who she was now, a wife, a mother, a rancher, a survivor. She had loved and lost and loved again. She had faced her fears and come out the other side stronger. She had let Vincent into her heart gently, carefully, one day at a time, until love had filled all the spaces grief had left behind. "I am happy," she said softly. "I did not think I would ever be able to say that again, but I am. I am so incredibly happy." "So am I," Vincent said, holding her closer. "So am I, my love." As the years continued to pass, the Rollins Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the Presidio area. Thomas grew into a strong, responsible young man who loved working with the cattle, just like his father. Emily was bright and quick-witted, with a gift for numbers that made her invaluable in managing the ranch's accounts. Samuel was the gentle one, more interested in the horses than the cattle, spending hours training and caring for the animals with a patience that reminded Clara of Vincent. Vincent's hair started to show threads of silver, and Clara found a few gray strands in her own dark hair. They laughed about getting older, about how their bodies ached more after a long day of work, about how they could not stay up as late as they used to. But they also marveled at everything they had built together, at the family they had raised, at the love that had only deepened with time. In 1899, Thomas met a young woman named Sarah at a church social in Presidio. She was the daughter of a storekeeper, a sweet-natured girl with a pretty smile and a kind heart. Thomas was smitten immediately, and by Christmas, he was asking Vincent's permission to court her seriously. Vincent gave his blessing, and Clara found herself getting misty-eyed watching her oldest son fall in love. They were married the following spring, in a ceremony that reminded Clara so much of her own wedding to Vincent that she had to wipe away tears throughout the entire service. Sarah moved onto the ranch, and Clara found herself with a daughter-in-law she adored, a girl who was eager to learn and quick to help with whatever needed doing. A year later, Clara became a grandmother when Sarah gave birth to a baby girl they named Margaret. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Clara felt the circle of life completing itself in the most beautiful way. She had survived loss and grief and had found love again. She had raised children and built a life worth living. And now she was seeing the next generation begin, carrying forward everything she and Vincent had created. "We did it," she whispered to Vincent one night as they watched Thomas and Sarah with baby Margaret. "We built something that will last." "We did," Vincent agreed, his arm around her shoulders. "And it is more than I ever dreamed possible." By 1902, the ranch was thriving beyond anything Clara had imagined in those dark days after Thomas's death. They had over 100 head of cattle, dozens of horses, and enough land to support it all. Emily had married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man named Peter who treated her with respect and love. Samuel, at 11, was already showing signs of becoming an exceptional horseman. Vincent was 53 now, still strong and capable but showing the wear of decades of hard physical labor. Clara was 42, her face lined from years in the sun but her eyes bright with contentment. They still sat on the porch every evening, still held hands, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. One evening in the fall of that year, as the air finally cooled after the brutal summer heat, Clara said, "Do you ever regret it, staying here instead of continuing to drift?" Vincent looked at her with such love in his eyes that it took her breath away. "Not for a single moment. This life with you, our children, this ranch, it is everything I never knew I was looking for. You saved me, Clara, just as much as I like to think I helped save you." "We saved each other," Clara said softly. "I was so lost after Thomas died. I thought my life was over. But you showed me that there could be another chapter, that loss did not have to be the end of my story." "You were already finding your way," Vincent said. "I just walked beside you for a while." "The strength was always yours, Clara." "Maybe," Clara conceded, "but I could not have done it alone. You opened my heart when I thought it was closed forever. You were patient and kind and steady, and you gave me the space to heal. I will never stop being grateful for that." Vincent kissed her forehead. "You gave me a home and a family and a reason to stop running from my past. I am the one who should be grateful." "Then let's both be grateful," Clara said, smiling. "Grateful for each other, for our children, for the life we have built." "I can agree to that," Vincent said, pulling her close. They sat together as the stars came out one by one, as they had done countless times over the years. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their family: Sarah singing to Margaret, Samuel practicing his reading, the ordinary domestic noises that meant home and safety and love. Clara thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from the traumatic loss of her first husband to the slow, careful opening of her heart to Vincent. It had not been easy. There had been setbacks and fears and moments when she had wanted to retreat back into her protective walls. But Vincent had been there, patient and steadfast, letting her move at her own pace, proving day after day that love did not have to mean loss. She had learned that healing was not a straight line. Some days were easier than others. She still thought about Thomas, still missed the future they had planned together. But she had learned to hold space for both her past and her present, to honor what had been while embracing what was. And what was beautiful. A husband who loved her deeply and showed it every day in 1,000 small ways. Children who were growing into good, strong people. A ranch that provided not just income but purpose and pride. A community that had come to respect and value them. A life that was full and rich and worth living. "I love you, Vincent Rollins," Clara said into the darkness. "Thank you for stopping at my homestead that day. Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving me." "I love you too, Clara Rollins," Vincent said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Thank you for taking a chance on a drifter with nothing to offer but hard work and a willing heart. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They remained on the porch until the night grew cold, reluctant to end this perfect moment. But eventually they went inside together, hand in hand, to the warm house full of family and love. Clara looked around at everything they had built, everything they had become, and felt nothing but gratitude and joy. The homesteader's heart had been closed after loss, but it had opened again, gently and carefully, until love could enter. And that love had transformed everything, healing old wounds and creating new possibilities. Clara had learned that the human heart was more resilient than she had ever imagined, capable of loving again, even after devastating loss, capable of building new dreams even when old ones had been shattered. As she lay in bed that night, Vincent's arm around her, and the sounds of their family settling down for the night around them, Clara offered up a silent prayer of thanksgiving. For this man who had seen past her walls to the woman beneath, for the children they had created together, for the life they had built from grief and hope and determination, for second chances and new beginnings and the possibility of joy after sorrow. She had been broken, but she had healed. She had been lost, but she had been found. She had thought her story was over, but it had just been waiting for a new chapter to begin. And what a beautiful chapter it had turned out to be, full of love and family and purpose, full of all the things that made life worth living. Vincent stirred beside her, pulling her closer in his sleep, and Clara smiled in the darkness. This was her life now, not perfect but real, not without challenges but full of love. And she would not trade it for anything in the world. The ranch continued to prosper in the years that followed. Thomas and Sarah had 2 more children, a son and another daughter, and Emily and Peter added 3 children to the growing family. The original homestead that Clara had struggled to maintain alone had become the center of a thriving multi-generational family enterprise. Vincent taught his grandsons how to ride and rope, passing on the skills his own father had taught him. Clara taught her granddaughters how to garden and cook and manage a household, but she also taught them to be strong and independent, to know their own worth. She wanted them to understand that a woman could survive anything if she had courage and determination. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1906, Vincent surprised Clara by taking her on a trip to San Antonio. It was the first time they had left the ranch for more than a day or two since they had married, and Clara was both excited and nervous about being away from home for so long. But Vincent insisted that they needed time together, just the 2 of them, to remember who they were outside of being parents and grandparents and ranchers. They stayed in a real hotel, with running water and electric lights, luxuries that seemed impossibly fancy after years of homestead living. They walked through the city streets hand in hand, visited the Alamo, ate meals in restaurants, and talked for hours about their life together. On their last night, as they sat in their hotel room looking out at the city lights, Vincent said, "These 20 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life." "Mine too," Clara said, leaning against him. "I never imagined I could be this happy. When you first rode onto my homestead, I was barely surviving. I certainly was not living. You changed everything, Vincent." "We changed everything together," Vincent corrected gently. "You did the hardest part, Clara. You chose to take a risk on love again. You chose to open your heart when it would have been so much easier to keep it closed. That took more courage than anything I did." Clara thought about that, about the terrified woman she had been, so afraid of being hurt again that she had almost turned away the best thing that ever happened to her. "I am glad I was brave enough to let you in. I am glad I did not let fear win." "So am I," Vincent said, kissing her softly. "So am I, my love." They returned to the ranch renewed and refreshed, ready to face whatever the future held. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as all years do. Martha Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1908, and Clara mourned the loss of her dear friend. But she took comfort in knowing that Martha had lived a long, full life and had died surrounded by people who loved her. Samuel married in 1910, bringing home a spirited young woman named Catherine, who shared his love of horses. They built a house on the far edge of the ranch property and started their own horse breeding operation, expanding the family business in a new direction. Clara delighted in watching her youngest son find his path, building something that was his own while still being part of the larger family enterprise. By 1915, Clara was 55 years old and had 11 grandchildren, with another on the way. The ranch employed a dozen workers and was one of the most successful operations in West Texas. Vincent was 66, his hair completely silver now, his movements a little slower but his mind as sharp as ever. They had built something that would last long after they were gone, a legacy of hard work and love and determination. One evening in late spring, as they sat on their porch watching the sun set over land they had worked for decades, Clara said, "Do you remember that first day you rode onto my property? When I stood there with my hand on my gun, ready to send you away?" Vincent laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "I remember thinking that you were the most beautiful and the most terrifying woman I had ever seen. You looked like you would shoot me if I made one wrong move." "I might have," Clara admitted with a smile. "I was so angry at the world back then, so hurt and lost and afraid. I had forgotten how to be anything other than sad." "You were never just sad," Vincent said seriously. "Even in your grief, you were strong. You were surviving against impossible odds, refusing to give up even though you had every reason to. That strength was what made me want to stay. I saw who you could be if someone helped you remember." "You did more than help me remember," Clara said softly. "You gave me a reason to want to live again. You showed me that my story was not over, that there could be joy and love and family and purpose after loss. You gave me everything, Vincent." "We gave each other everything," Vincent said, taking her hand. "That is what love is supposed to do. It is supposed to make both people better, stronger, happier. And that is what we have done for each other all these years." Clara looked out at the ranch, at the house where their children and grandchildren gathered for Sunday dinners, at the barns and corrals and fields that represented decades of work and sacrifice and love. She thought about the scared, broken woman she had been and the strong, content woman she had become. The journey from one to the other had been long and difficult, but it had been worth every step. "I would do it all again," she said. "Every hard day, every moment of fear, every struggle. I would do it all again to end up right here with you." "As would I," Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are my home, Clara. You always have been." They sat together as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, as the stars began to appear one by one. Around them, the ranch settled into evening, the sounds of cattle lowing and horses nickering and the wind rustling through the cottonwood trees. It was the music of home, of a life well lived, of love that had endured and deepened through decades of joy and sorrow. Clara rested her head on Vincent's shoulder, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her cheek. This man had saved her life in ways both large and small. He had given her space to grieve while gently coaxing her back to life. He had been patient when she was afraid, strong when she was weak, steady when everything else felt uncertain. He had loved her through her darkest days and celebrated with her during the brightest ones. And she had done the same for him, giving him a home and a family and a purpose after years of aimless drifting. They had healed each other, built something beautiful together, created a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. As the darkness deepened and the night grew cool, they finally went inside to the house filled with memories and love. Clara looked around at the life they had built, at the photos on the walls showing their children and grandchildren, at the worn furniture and familiar spaces that told the story of their years together. She thought about the closed, broken heart she had carried for 3 years after Thomas's death, convinced she would never love or be loved again. And she thought about how Vincent had opened that heart so gently, so patiently, giving her the time and space she needed to heal, proving day after day that love could be trusted again. It had not been quick or easy, but it had been worth it. Every moment of fear, every step forward and backward, every tear and every laugh had led to this, a life full of love and purpose and family. A life that honored both the past and the present, that held space for loss and joy, that recognized that the human heart was capable of remarkable resilience. As Clara prepared for bed that night, helping Vincent with his boots as his joints had grown stiff with age, she felt nothing but gratitude. For this man, for this life, for the courage to try again when trying seemed impossible. She had been lost, but she had been found. She had been broken, but she had healed. She had closed her heart to protect it, but she had opened it again to let love enter. And what had entered was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. A love story that had started with caution and fear, but had grown into something deep and lasting and true. They had built a life together on the foundation of patience and understanding, on the recognition that healing took time, on the belief that love was worth the risk. Now, in their later years, they could look back and see the full arc of their story, from that first meeting when Clara had stood with her hand on her gun and Vincent had offered help to a stranger, through the slow building of trust and affection, through marriage and children and decades of partnership. It was a story of loss transformed into love, of grief giving way to joy, of a closed heart opening again to embrace life in all its messy, beautiful fullness. As Vincent lay beside her in the darkness, his breathing evening out into sleep, Clara whispered into the night, "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving me until I could love again." And though he was asleep, she knew he would have said the same to her, because that was what their love had always been. Two people finding each other when they both needed it most. Two broken pieces fitting together to make something whole and strong and lasting. The homesteader's heart had been closed after loss, but it had opened gently, carefully, one day at a time, until love could enter again. And when love finally entered, it had filled every corner with light and warmth and hope, transforming a life defined by grief into a life defined by joy. It was a miracle Clara had never expected, a second chance she had thought was impossible, a love story that proved the resilient power of the human heart to heal and hope and love again.